Welcome to the Waking Up Podcast. This is Sam Harris. There's been an interesting thing happening. I don't quite know what this means, but I've been noticing in the last few weeks that when I've said things that are overtly disparaging of religion, I've been getting pushback from my audience in ways that I never have before. And what I think has happened here is that I have spent enough time off the topic of atheism and religion, or the conflict between science and religion, that I've attracted new podcast listeners, mostly, who are not so familiar with my work on that topic. So I noticed this in two places. First, in my last podcast with Andrew Sullivan and David Frum in D.C., I had said at one point when debating the validity of religion with Andrew, something about not having to believe any bullshit to lead a moral life. And my calling, in this case, Catholic dogma bullshit, was deemed offensive by some people. I remember there were probably some people in the room who felt that, and there were definitely some people who reached out by email to communicate that to be so disparaging of a religious tradition was unbecoming in me or counterproductive. All I can say is, if you were to read my first book, The End of Faith, or my second book, Letter to a Christian Nation, there are perhaps some surprises in store for you. It really comes down for me between the difference between believing things for good reasons and believing things for bad reasons. And good reasons are the province of rationality and science and honest conversation. And bad reasons are the province of self-deception and wishful thinking and conscious fraud and dogmatism. And there's nowhere where these latter attributes are given more energy than in the context of religion, where they get rebranded as faith and promoted to the pantheon of human virtues. So all I can say is that there are some surprises in store, perhaps unpleasant, if you look at what I've said and written about religion in the past. The other piece of data I have here is I recently put out a meme on social media, which took a quote which came from one of my talks. I think it came from my debate with William Lane Craig. And the quote is, "The true horror of religion is that it allows perfectly sane, intelligent people to believe by the billions what only lunatics or imbeciles could believe on their own. If you think that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, you have lost your mind. But if you believe more or less the same thing about a cracker in the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic." So Paul Lachine, the artist who made my slides for my TED Talk on AI, made this meme. I think this is the 16th meme he's made for me, which are all visually quite cool, whatever you may think about the quotation. So I put this out on Facebook and Twitter and saw a surprising degree of pushback. Many people were just aghast that I would take literally what was only meant to be a metaphor. The doctrine of transubstantiation is not a metaphor. I'm just going to read you from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, lest there be any doubt on this. Quote, "Because Christ, our Redeemer, said that it was truly his body that he was offering under the species of bread. And it has always been the conviction of the Church of God, and his Holy Council now declares again, that by the consecration of the bread and wine there takes place a change of the whole substance of the bread into the substance of the body of Christ our Lord, and of the whole substance of the wine into the substance of his blood. This change the Holy Catholic Church has fittingly and properly called transubstantiation." End quote. This is not a metaphor. Those who now think it's a metaphor have lost their faith in the actual doctrine. So I certainly stand by my claim that if you believe this about any other substance and any other person, in this case pancakes and Elvis, that would be virtually synonymous with there being something wrong with your mind, right? That this is disordered thinking. This would be a delusion, but a delusion that is shared or at least endorsed by millions and millions of people can't be called a delusion. In fact, and this is my point, the horror of religion is that it allows perfectly sane, intelligent people, right? People who are not suffering from some disorder of their thinking, to believe by the billions what only people who are psychologically compromised could believe on their own. There's a kind of epistemological safety in numbers. But it doesn't mean the beliefs are any more rational. It just means they're well subscribed. It takes a different sort of mind to strongly believe something just as incredible on one's own, right? And this is why we treat cults differently from mainstream religions, right? There's more of a social sacrifice, and the fact that a person is willing to make that social sacrifice means something. And in the ultimate case, the person who believes something that is completely unintelligible for the rest of humanity, well, that sort of sacrifice and isolation usually signals something about that person. In any case, it's amusing to see that I apparently have many listeners who don't realize just how deep my atheism runs, and I would just say that reading my first 2 books would certainly be the cure for that. Okay, so just a couple of things to announce. My next live event is in Chicago with Lawrence Krauss and Matt Dillahunty. And in fact, today's podcast is the audio from our New York event. We will certainly strive to not repeat ourselves in Chicago and in Phoenix after that. We have 2 events on the calendar. So after you listen to this audio, if you have questions you want us to hit, please email them or tweet them. Probably a few days before the Chicago event, we'll go out on social media and actually ask for questions. That's really the best way to guarantee that we don't cover the same ground. And as far as other events, there are still tickets for many that are coming up. I have my first book club event with Steve Pinker in Los Angeles in the middle of March. And a second book club event is now scheduled. I will announce that in a few weeks, but that's going to be with Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, who has a new book. And there should be many events hitting the calendar soon here. So if you're interested in coming to a live event, you can go to samharris.org/events. And as most of you know, those tickets become available to supporters of the podcast early and usually stay available only to supporters for the first 10 days or so. And now for today's episode. You've heard me with Lawrence Krauss before on the podcast. Lawrence is a physicist who will be familiar to most of you. And Matt Dillahunty has moderated a couple of discussions I had with Richard Dawkins, and you've heard him here as well. So without more introduction, I'll just say we get into several interesting topics here. We talk about nuclear war and Christian support for Trump. Trump does not come up much. Many of you will be happy to know. We talk about science and a universal conception of morality. We talk about the role of intuition in science, the primacy of consciousness as a fact, the nature of time, free will, the illusion of the self. Lawrence does not agree that it's an illusion. We may have to cover that topic again. And there's a few more topics here. In any case, it was a fun event. It was great to meet so many of you afterwards. These particular events are always followed by book signings, so the event itself was just an hour and a half, but the book signing winds up going for 2 hours or so. And that really is the chance to say hi. So if you enjoy this conversation, there will be 2 others with the same participants in Chicago and Phoenix coming up. So if you live close to either of those cities, feel free to come on out. Otherwise, I will try to get the audio and release it here. And now I bring you the event I did in New York with Lawrence Krauss and Matt Dillahunty.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege and honor to introduce the gentlemen who will be joining me on stage. Please welcome Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss.
No. Thank you. Thank you.
They're standing. You just can't see them.
Yeah.
We really
There
can't
are
see
people
you.
in there.
So
It's not a sound.
don't take lack of eye contact personally.
Yeah.
We'll bring the lights up before we get to the Q&A. How are you, gentlemen?
Good, good.
I have a disclaimer.
A disclaimer.
Yes, as you know, but they don't. I came down with food poisoning 2 nights ago. So if I either vomit or have to run off stage, it's not because of anything these two gentlemen have said. Okay, that's what I want to say.
Maybe if he liked you better, you'd feel better.
It's all right.
We'll see who runs off stage faster if you vomit.
I promise not to run off stage, mostly because I'm in boots that won't allow me to run anywhere. So today, we're going to be doing 3 of these. New York is the first time for the 3 of us together. And something happened today that was all over the news, and I thought it might be an interesting spot to start. Hawaii had an incredible false alarm today where an emergency alert system sent out a text message essentially saying that a ballistic missile had been detected heading towards Hawaii and to seek cover, and this is not a drill. And 39 minutes later, they announced that it was a false alarm. And it both intrigued me and terrified me about the new world that we live in compared to, when I was a kid. The technology that's there to save our lives, and yet things can go wrong because we're fallible. Are we better off if we're terrifying people with false alarms? And how do we go about dealing with a new world where technology is in everybody's hands and can be used and abused?
Well, maybe
We are in a context where it's plausible to worry that missiles could be headed toward Hawaii. So that's the underlying problem. But you
yeah,
should
but
probably
in
say
some
something about
sense,
the
I think
doomsday
people
clock.
aren't worried about it enough. I think in just a little under 2 weeks, I'll be going to Washington to announce the new value of the doomsday clock. I'm the chairman of the board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, as you know. And one of the things that worries me is that I think people have become very complacent about nuclear weapons. Because they haven't been used in over 70 years, people tend to think they'll never be used. And the real problem is that this kind of thing became public. But there's a great book called Command and Control, which is terrifying, and you realize how many close calls we've had. It's kind of amazing that there hasn't been either an accident or panic. And
If you haven't read it, that's Eric Schlosser, his book, and there was a PBS documentary done on it, and you should either read it or watch that documentary.
read it, but have a bottle of scotch or something when you're reading it, because it is really terrifying, as it should be. And so part of the problem, in fact, of this, there's a lot of problems that people don't realize, that in fact, because intercontinental ballistic missiles act relatively quickly, in 25 or 30 minutes, that they can do their work and do most of the way around the Earth. We still live in a world where the United States and Russia both have about 1,000 weapons on a status where they're prepared to respond immediately. And as a lot of people, I didn't want to mention this word, but until a guy whose name I won't mention came in the White House, people didn't realize this, and I actually didn't realize it either until I was writing a piece. But people now know, and if you don't, you should know this, that there is no safeguard against the president launching nuclear weapons. There's no one he or she would have to ask. There's no one who can say no, and there's no constitutional check on that. And recently, some Congress people did discuss producing such a check. During the Cold War, there was perhaps the height of the Cold War. There was some reason for that, because there were 20,000 nuclear weapons that Russia and then the Soviet Union and the United States were aiming at each other, and the idea was you have to launch them quickly. But now there isn't that reason, and yet we still have that, and that itself is terrifying, because if that warning had not got, and by the way, the warning I understood was due to a shift change, and someone pressed the wrong button when they went off the shift. This is true.
Now, that raises a problem, when I have to check out at the grocery store and swipe my credit card, I have to click yes like 18 times just to pay for my Coke. How could you possibly hit the wrong button in a shift change and not get a, hey, are you sure you want to send this message?
But imagine that went not to the sensible but scared people in Hawaii, but imagine that went right to the White House.
Right.
Okay?
Well, to read command and control is to witness how, by sheer dumb luck, we have avoided nuking ourselves, one another, and even ourselves. I mean, just
So many
literally
times.
dropped live nukes on like North Carolina,
Yeah.
and 2 of 3 safeties failed. And the final safety was like a manual toggle switch that was just in the right position.
And
it's
and in silos, the book begins with a potential nuclear weapon exploding in a silo. It is truly amazing, and it really argues for something that we've been arguing at the Bulletin, and certainly I try to write about, which is that we are safer with fewer nuclear weapons and not more nuclear weapons, because the more you have, the more likely there will be an accident or a false alarm. And yet we're in a situation right now where there are no arms control treaties. And what I was going to say at the beginning, which I think we were talking about beforehand, is what discourages me when I write about nuclear weapons compared to almost anything else I write about in the popular media, there's less interest. I don't know whether people don't want to think about it or they're just so complacent.
Armageddon is boring.
Yeah, Armageddon, I guess, is boring, or you don't want to think about it.
Can you say what you said about William Perry's opinion? Is that for public consumption?
I don't know.
It's just us.
Thanks, Sam. I'll think of something back. But William Perry, I'll use this as an opportunity. We'll be at my Origins project in Arizona. We'll be having an event on a workshop on autonomous weapons, nuclear weapons, and defense. And I'll be doing a dialogue with William Perry in a month.
Maybe give a 2-line bio of.
William Perry was the Secretary of Defense for Clinton, I guess, and is an amazing man in many, many ways, and has a long view. He's not a youngster like you, but he said in conversation that he thinks we are now living in the time that is more dangerous than any time, even during the height of the Cold War, which is really kind of sobering.
With respect to this issue?
With respect to nuclear weapons, yeah. And it's an issue that people should be concerned about. So it's awful that happened, but if it raises public awareness of the kind of ridiculous accidents, the ridiculous false alarms. There's a man who actually we nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's now dead, but a Russian. In my opinion, one of the few people who probably really deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. A Russian who was working in a missile silo, and there was a computer glitch, and it showed a nuclear weapon being launched in the United States, and he got the order to fire. And showed another weapon 5 minutes later, and another weapon. And he personally reasoned that if there was going to be an attack from the U.S., they wouldn't wait 4 or 5 minutes between each, or 2 minutes or whatever it was. So he disobeyed the command and probably personally saved the world. Yeah.
It's nice to take that warning that went out today, even though it's a mistake. It lets us know about human error. It also may raise awareness. There is a potentially huge downside in that this could end up looking a little more like a crying wolf situation, where the next time, if it's real and you get that warning, that you don't take shelter. But something you said is terrifying to me, and not specifically because of who's in the White House. This is true no matter who's there. The very idea that Congress has to declare war, but they don't have to declare that it's okay to nuke people. In a nation and a system that's built on checks and balances, this one thing doesn't appear to have sufficient.
The most consequential thing has no check and balance.
Yeah,
and I worry.
It shocked me. I don't know if you knew about that earlier. I mean, literally, I thought that there had to be approval of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or at least a majority of cabinet members or something. But in fact, there is no check on that.
I would like to think that if somebody decided to go rogue and do it, that there would be somebody sensible nearby, some Secret Service person who would do what that Russian missile agent did.
Well, one hopes that, the people who actually have to press the button, and their button is bigger than his, they would, it's a sober, you actually have to do it. I think those people think very carefully, but, they're trained to realize that they may have to do that, and so it's
and they drill it all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
So I wonder how this ties in to, I try not to paint with too broad of a brush when I talk about any specific religion, including Christianity, but there are a number of Christians, including some of my family members, who are eagerly awaiting Armageddon. We all deal with people who construct conspiracy theories on occasion. I don't think it'd be that hard to put together a conspiracy theory that the reason we have Trump is because there were people who are okay with the idea of Armageddon. Because I know tons of evangelicals who were supportive of him when there's nothing about this man that fits like the churches I went to, even though I know those churches are waiting for an apocalypse.
The most benign interpretation of the Christian support is just their calculated assumption, which is borne out that he will give them what they want because they're a voting bloc that he needs. I remember I ran into Ralph Reed, the former head of the Christian Coalition, at a conference, and this was still during the campaign, but when Trump was the nominee and was professing to be a Christian of some flavor. And I had debated Reed once on television, but we actually had never met, and I said to him, there's no way you think he's actually a person of faith, right? But how do you explain the Christian support? And he immediately fell back on this trope, who am I to judge what's in another man's heart? Insofar as I could tell that he was bullshitting, he was really bullshitting.
He's happy to judge what's in other people's hearts.
Yeah, right. But the worst possible interpretation is the one you just gave, which is there's at least some millions of people, and maybe tens of millions of people in this country, for whom biblical prophecy is real. It's a real roadmap to the future, and they're expecting the wheels to completely come off this car before the end, and that will be the best thing that happens. That's necessary for the best thing that will ever happen to happen.
I have to say that since Trump got elected, I've been sort of hoping for Armageddon too, but in a way, it just seems better than listening to tweets every day. But I actually don't think it's the Armageddon thing. I was actually just thinking about writing a piece about this, and I'll say it, although it'll get people angry, some people. To me, it represents one of the real problems of professed Christianity. Because when you said they don't think Trump is a Christian, but they'll get what they want. What do they want? Do they want the things that they're supposed to be abandoning, like love and all the things? No, what they want is hate. What they want is laws that restrict freedom of others. And that means to me that operationally, in this country, when it comes to the politics, professed Christianity is equivalent with hate.
Well, to bend over backwards, before...
I want to see if there's anyone who would... I can't tell if they're out there.
The most charitable interpretation is not that it's synonymous with hate all the way down the line, because just imagine if you're someone who really thinks that abortion is akin to murder, right? That there is no difference between killing a fetus at the 8-week stage and killing a fully developed human being. If you think that, then you think our society is just spectating on a Holocaust that has been going on for your entire life. And it's easy to see how someone would not be moved by hate and would in their own mind be moved by compassion and love and a concern for divine retribution if they believe that God is watching all the while.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's extreme to say that. But see, you could say the same thing about restricting the rights of gay people. That it's really love, because that's a sin in a lot of people's hearts, and therefore
insanely, you can say the same thing about members of ISIS who were throwing gay people off of rooftops. Some of you must have seen this footage of ISIS members hugging, with apparent sincerity, the people they were about to hurl off of rooftops.
Because it's a loving act.
This was not a naked declaration of hate. This was, sorry, this is how the game is played. We have to do this.
Well, that represents to me that, I mean, that's the paradox. So, and I don't know if I've said it before on stage with you, but Steve Weinberg, who's a physicist friend, a Nobel laureate, and also an atheist, has said that there are good people and there are bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of truth to that. So the people are, and it's not just religion, it's ideology. Whenever people move away from reason and justify, and we all do it, but justify bad actions, and as if No one, I think very few people do bad things thinking they want to do a bad thing.
Right.
They're doing it for some reason that they think is a good reason.
Well, we can go right back to Voltaire to address all this, which is you can get people, if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities.
Yeah.
And once you have poisoned the foundation, which I think is a hallmark of what many religions do, of right and wrong, of about how we should go about determining what is a moral good, if you poison that sufficiently, that's how you get people to do that. That's how you get them to bomb abortion clinics. That's how you get them to throw homosexuals off roofs. Which kind of brings us to one of the questions. We polled a little bit. I asked for suggestions on Facebook, and Sam had asked on Twitter. And there's a couple things that keep coming up. But I think, given what we're talking about, this issue of morality terrifies believers. I've been told that atheists can't be moral. And then the people who have put like another half second of thought into it will say, well, of course you can be moral, but you can only be moral because you were raised in a Christian environment that taught you about morals. And I gave a talk for a number of years, but you wrote The Moral Landscape. And I want you to just take a couple of minutes and give a summation of objective reality, science-based assessments, and why people don't have to be terrified, and why it may in fact be more terrifying if morals are just the dictates of some individual or being.
Well, it's clearly more terrifying if the Bible is true or the Quran is true. I mean, because then the universe has been created and is now governed by an omniscient sadist. Right? I mean, he's created a universe with hell to be populated by people who he didn't give enough evidence to convince them of the truth of his doctrine. Right? So he could have just given enough evidence and we'd all be fundamentalist Christians or Salafi Muslims. But the miracles are always thousands of years old, or they're in India, or strangely they're in places where...
Same place UFO sightings are.
Or upstate New York.
Okay. But they're not sort of like the UFO abductions and the cattle molestations. It could happen right here, right now, in front of 2,000 educated people, and we would all be convinced. But that's not going to happen for some perverse reason.
I'd still be skeptical.
Yes.
I'd still be skeptical.
We would still be, we would
you
demand...
can imagine if you're in dialogue with an omniscient being who's bent upon convincing you for your own good, that can happen very quickly.
I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah, well, apparently I'm dumbing it down a lot.
But to tie into what he's saying, I've had Christians tell me that God wouldn't reveal himself to me because I would continue to question, deny. And I'm like, what kind of weak-ass God do you believe in who is incapable of convincing me? Oh, you're just too damn obstinate.
So let's leave that. So we can leave that aside. There's something strange about believing that these books, as written, give you a truly moral worldview that you would endorse. If any person behaved the way the God of the Bible behaves, that is our definition of a psychopath and a sadist. Yeah. But the reason why you can have objective morality, I think that you can have a few short steps to objective morality. And what I mean by objective is not that it's all just a matter of atoms. The universe includes subjective experience. It includes consciousness is a natural phenomenon. Consciousness is a property of the universe. We don't know exactly at what stage it emerges in information processing in complex systems, or maybe it goes even deeper than that. I mean, it's totally possible that there's some spooky view of consciousness going further down than vast numbers of neurons or information processing units doing their thing. There's no especially good reason to believe that, I would say.
A lot of good reasons not to believe that.
Yes, but still, it's not. The jury is arguably still out on that. What it's not still out on is a few fundamental questions. One, clearly consciousness exists. Even if we're living in a simulation on some alien hard drive, something seems to be happening, right? And that seeming is what I'm calling consciousness. So even if you're a brain in a vat right now, or you're in the Matrix, or this is all just a dream and you're going to wake up in a few minutes and find yourself in bed, no matter how confused you might be about your circumstance, there is still consciousness and its contents in each moment. And there is a vast difference between excruciating and pointless misery and sublime happiness and creativity and joy and love and all of the good things in life. And we have no idea how far that continuum actually goes in both directions, but we really know that we like one side of it much better than the other side of it. And we don't have to justify that preference. You don't have to justify preferring the happiest possible life to being tortured for eternity, right? And the idea that you would need some philosophical argument to justify that is just a specious claim that has confused a lot of people. And the idea that you would need to be able to draw your preference there, again, for avoiding the worst possible misery for everyone, that you'd have to draw that from some book that has been dictated by an omniscient being, that also is a specious claim. So I view morality as a kind of navigation problem, and the reason why this is of a piece with ultimately a scientific understanding of the mind and a scientific understanding of human well-being and of conscious systems generally is that navigating between these two ends of the continuum of experience, avoiding the worst possible misery and finding true bliss and creativity and connection and love, there are right answers about how to do that for properly constituted minds. And for us, there are biochemical answers, there are psychological answers, there are sociological answers, there's economic answers, political answers. Every piece of human knowledge that's legitimate knowledge has to be brought to bear on the question of how to live a fulfilling life. And it is possible to be wrong, and it's possible to not know what you're missing, and it's possible to be right for the wrong reasons. And so every permutation of ignorance and confusion is there to be suffered and endured, and we have to break the spell of thinking that we need to live forever shattered by tribal dogmatisms in order to talk about there being right answers to moral questions.
As Sam knows, we had another Origins event where Sam was at talking about exactly this and had a bunch of
We got a lot of pushback from
we got a lot of pushback.
philosophers,
Yeah, but so I think that, I've had a lot of discussions about this since then, and it may be, and it is probably true that reason is the slave of passion for most people. We possess reason, but reason doesn't necessarily drive our actions.
Yeah.
And we justify things after the fact on the basis of what we want it to be, and then we come up with a rational argument for it. I think that's true.
Understanding that is another exercise of reason.
Exactly. And
For clarity, there's flawed reasoning, but that doesn't mean that reason itself is flawed.
No, but I think we're capable, and you and I and everyone in this audience does it. That we all rationalize our lives every day. We wake up, we rationalize that we like our work or our spouse or whatever else it is in order to get through the day. And
let it be known that I didn't nod my head to that.
Yeah, that's right. Good. Let it be noted. But
it's only audio.
And so I'm not 100% convinced that you can always get ought from is, as some famous philosopher once said. But I do think I agree with you completely that it's a process that without is you can't get ought. I think that's the point. Without is, you can't get off. If you don't know the consequences of your actions in any way, and that's what science is. Science tells you reason, but I view science as sort of reason based on empirical evidence. Then you can't possibly make decisions that you can't determine what's right or wrong.
You need to know what the goal is and what the outcome is going to be.
What the outcome is going to be. So without a careful understanding of and then some people call this utilitarianism, I guess, but I just see it as without science there can be no morality, in my opinion, or no sensible morality. And I think what we've seen, and G. Pinker and others have argued, I think, pretty effectively, that in some ways the Enlightenment and rational thinking has led to a world where some things that were once thinkable are not thinkable now. And so there's no doubt, I don't know whether I would argue that we can, certainly I would argue that we might not be able to understand morality now, but that's irrelevant because we agree that not understanding something is not evidence of anything but not understanding. Right. The more we learn, the more we will understand. So I do think ultimately we'll have a neural understanding of almost all our decision-making capabilities. But certainly without that reason, I don't think you could even discuss the question.
Right. Well, let me just take 1 minute to say why I think this is-ought business is totally confused. This comes from a paragraph in Hume's work where he was actually trying to hold religious conceptions of morality at bay. And I think it's been misinterpreted, it's certainly been overused as one of these exports from philosophy that has just gotten into the heads of everybody and is influential, totally out of proportion to its actual validity. One thing I would point out is that Hume said he found many seeming paradoxes, and one was with respect to causation.
Yeah.
And if you took him seriously about causation, you couldn't really take science very seriously, because apparently there's no evidence of causation in the world. We just see the contiguity of various events, but we never see causes between A and B. So this is odd business. Let's say there is no ought, there is no should, there is no obligation to do anything in this universe. There is just what is. There's just the totality of facts that are actual and perhaps possible, perhaps also impossible. Whether there's such a real thing as possibility, or everything is in fact actual, it's just happening in a parallel universe, right? Or trillions upon trillions of such universes. There are only facts. And the first thing I would ask you is, if you can't get your sense of how you should live from the totality of facts, all of reality, where do you think you can get this sense of how you should live? So you're not impoverished having all the facts of the universe at your disposal. Yeah. And you still have, even if there's no such thing as morality, we still have this navigation problem. Put your hand into a wood chipper and see how much you like it, right? Yeah. You will very quickly get the message that you don't want to do that again. You will want to avoid that. And there are an infinite number of ways in which we can experience pointless misery from which no good comes. And we will find ourselves navigating, and all I'm arguing is that we call morality those subset of behaviors and commitments that relate in social space to this navigation problem of finding better lives together. And if you were alone on a desert island, you wouldn't call it morality, but you would still talk about well-being and happiness.
I agree completely. I guess the question is one of what one calls objective morality, if you want to use those terms. In the sense that everything you said, I think, is clearly true. The question I would have is that at the same time, because that navigation effort is sort of has an evolutionary basis as well as a cultural basis, I think.
We know evolution is wrong on most of these questions.
Yeah, but I think that our thinking has an evolutionary basis, and I don't think that. I think it's clear that that's the case.
Yeah.
Then it means to me that morality is a moving target too. The question is so that humans are hardwired, I think, to find some things moral and not, and that's an interesting question to find out how they are. And as you know, some psychologists do test the famous trolley car experiment, and so. When one talks about objective reality, I think it's based on a totality of experience, but that totality of experience evolves, and therefore I'm a little more hesitant at talking about absolute morality.
Yes.
Well,
no, I don't use absolute.
Yeah, but it's evolving into a space of right and wrong answers and real facts about the conscious experience of actual and possible being. So there's a right answer to the question of, if you were going to ask, if I add this compound to my neurochemistry, is it going to make me happier or not, right? Mm-hmm. Insofar as we could come to some kind of completed neuroscience of happiness, well, then we would understand more and more about the likelihood of you helping or hurting yourself that way. But so too with any use of your attention. If I'm in this relationship, am I going to be happier or not? There are right and wrong answers there, whether or not you discover them.
You discover them after the fact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but you don't know what you're missing, right? Like you don't know what in a counterfactual situation you could have done something yesterday that would have made today much better than it was for you, and you may never know what you missed. And again, so it's realism for me, so whether it's scientific realism or moral realism, just amounts to the claim that it's possible to be wrong. It's possible not to know what you're missing. It's possible for everyone to be wrong. Like every physicist alive, you could ask some pressing question about physics, and I don't know how many physicists there are, 30,000. All 30,000 could be wrong, and then tomorrow someone could be right.
And I get letters every day from those people who say they are. But
how many physicists are there?
That's the whole. But that's it's interesting you brought up this example, because that's the whole point of science.
Exactly. Yeah.
The whole point of science. If you couldn't be wrong, there would be no science. The whole point of science, is to go in and try and prove your colleagues wrong in some sense. That's how science perceives, because it doesn't prove things right. It only proves things wrong. And then you narrow down what's left over. And so you're absolutely right. And that's what makes empirical evidence so useful. That's why it should be the basis of public policy, because you can find out what doesn't work. Yeah. That's an essential part of living, but also it's what makes science powerful and worth utilizing in every aspect of our experience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thanks. There's a couple things about the moral issue, and I'm glad you guys made the points. People confuse objective morality with absolute morality. None of us, I assume, I know Sam and I aren't advocating for absolute morality. Actually, situational ethics is probably the term that I use most often. When I talk about objective morality, I just mean that it's not just subject to your whim or any subjective experience. Because one of the objections we get when you say you don't want to put your hand in a wood chipper, somebody will come along and say, well, somebody might want to do that. Who are you to decide what's right for them? We're speaking in general rules. We are physical beings in a physical universe with rules that dictate what the consequences of our actions are.
And if there really were a masochist who wanted to do that, there would be a complete scientific understanding of masochism that's possible.
Yeah, sure.
And it's possible that there's a way of being a masochist that admits of equivalent well-being, say. I highly doubt this is the case, but let's say that was the case. So having right and wrong answers to questions of morality, and this is why I use this analogy of a moral landscape, it doesn't mean there's just one right answer for everybody. There could be many, a functionally infinite number of peaks on this landscape, but there are even more wrong answers. There's a larger infinite set of wrong answers, and you know when you're not on a peak, and because your hand is in the wood chipper, and it turns out you're not one of those masochists who likes it.
So the one question that you've been hammered with, that I've been hammered with, is, you're talking about objective morality, but your foundation of morality is well-being. Now, when it comes to the is-ought problem, I jokingly and fallaciously pointed out that you may not be able to get from an is to an ought, but I can get from two ises to an ought. Because if I know what the goal is, and I know what the consequences of my action is, or the consequence of my action is, then I can tell what I ought to do to achieve that goal, which was a good way to sum it up. There's a problem in there that I'm not going to get into. But I believe I understand what you assessed in Moral Landscape, which is kind of my view of this, is, under what basis, what objective basis have you decided that well-being is the standard? And I think you said, what other standard could there be? That's the thing about secular moral systems, is they have at their foundation the goal of getting better. And even if I pick three premises that are going to serve, I can pick them arbitrarily. Death is preferable to life. And you can work through and do thought experiments to see, does that get you towards a better world? But all this little bickering about better world, who defines better, what's better, well-being, has anybody in all, from your detractors, suggested another non-God's dictate, divine command foundation that would be better than well-being? And if they did, how would you respond?
Well, there's two ironies here. One is that the religious answer is also predicated on well-being. I mean, when you ask religious people, what's wrong with going to hell for eternity? It's because it's too hot there. Right? You don't want to be there. Heaven is much better. It's a story about some eternal circumstance of well-being or its antithesis that awaits us after death. Now, if that were true, if there was good reason to believe in the Christian heaven or the Muslim paradise, I would be the first to say that it's really important to live so as to place the right bet on eternity. I mean, what's 70 years compared to eternity of suffering or happiness? But it just so happens that there's no good reason to believe in those after-death states. But they're still talking about consciousness and its contents and the difference between misery and well-being. And for me, the definition of well-being is truly open-ended. It's there to be refined and further discovered. And I think there are possibilities of well-being that we can't imagine. The other irony here is that when people say that you have this assumption that well-being is good or worth finding, as though we could do otherwise, as though having an axiom at the bottom here makes this unscientific. Every science is based on similar axioms that can't justify themselves. So take, for example, assuming that the universe is intelligible. right? Assuming that 2 plus 2 makes 4 for every 2 and 2. If it works for apples, it works for oranges, it's also going to work for cantaloupes. How do you know it's going to work for ravens and chickens? And how does it generalize? That's an intuition, right? That's a foundational
it's
intuition
still an
that
assumption
doesn't
that you need to
justify
test,
itself.
though. In physics, I mean, I think you.
But you don't test it by continuing to count apples and oranges and cantaloupes.
Well, we do things like that. We do check to see if the rules continue to work in places we haven't looked before.
But the idea that events have causes.
Yeah, unless time begins and then there was no cause because there was no before.
Right, but that's proffered as a violation of our intuition that works everywhere else in science.
Well,
right?
yeah, but I mean, I'm just, in some sense, playing the devil's advocate in this regard. But violation of
You're
intuition.
gonna have to assume
in my
something to
field,
play the devil's
violation of
advocate.
intuition is everything.
What was that?
In my field, violation of intuition is everything.
Except
the least
you're
trustworthy
you're
thing you
using
have is
oth-
intuition.
Yeah, no, but you're using other intuitions to get behind the bad ones. You're using, in most cases, mathematical intuitions to
I
get
guess
behind bad
I'm a
common
real
sense.
empiricist. I really am a theorist, but theory is highly suspect. Empirical evidence is the only thing that works for me.
Right, but the example I always use here, forgive me if you've heard it, but it makes the point, is that this is how you're using intuitions to get behind other intuitions. If you ask people if they could fold a piece of newspaper 100 times onto itself 100 times, you ask them how thick it would be, most people have the intuition that it would be something like 12 inches thick. And yet the real object would be light years across if you could fold a piece of paper.
You can't fold a piece of paper, no
can't.
matter how big it is.
Exactly, you can't,
Yeah.
right? Because it would be light years across. It's like you can fold it like 7 times or so. But the way you get there is you have.
I don't think it's a property of how big it is, by the way, just so you know.
What was that?
I don't think it's a property of how big it is.
No, there's an intuition that it.
Yeah,
that
but bigger doesn't help in this regard. But anyway,
Right,
it doesn't
yes.
matter.
Yes, well,
Bigger size doesn't matter. Let me make that clear. Anyway.
but the reason why you trust the math is because you have a very strong intuition that has been backed up by. I mean, you haven't
Because
run the experiment.
It works.
Well, no, but you haven't. You know that exponentiation works. You know that 2 times 2 gets you 4, and you do it again and it gets you 8. But you haven't got. Maybe it just peters out at some point. At a certain point, maybe there's one power of 2 that doesn't work.
Yeah, no, so so the way it works, it's more subtle. I don't know whether we can get into this, but in science, not in principle, there are no absolutes. So and that's why I don't like to use the word believe. We've used it 3 times or 4 times on stage already, and I think we should banish that word.
No, we fixed this when we were in Toronto.
No. Yeah, I know. But here's the idea: is that things are either likely or unlikely, and they're either really likely, and we say they're true, but we kind of but that really means that the probability is so large that based on our experience that it's so large that we don't even ask the question: is the sun going to rise tomorrow? It's highly likely.
Are you convinced that everything is either likely or unlikely?
Well, it's either likely or unlikely. That's
You're convinced of that.
What?
You're convinced that
there's a high likelihood of that fact.
Okay.
Clever, but that's not who
in
you
the
were a moment
context
ago.
that I would use the word belief. It's not I am convinced of something without it. It just means I'm convinced of something, and then we assess how and why I'm. And to go along with Hume, it's about a confidence level. I proportion my confidence level to the evidence that supports it. So I'm behind you on all the empirical evidence. I'm not going to throw the word believe out just because it gets into hairy territories of uncertainty, because that's the world we live in.
I think it's just doesn't help to use
knowledge is. I think the distinction between belief and knowledge, in the way we use those terms, is the one you just drew. It's the matter of your confidence. If you think
I think the only form of knowledge is empirical evidence. There's no other forms of knowledge.
Okay, but I'm pretty sure we're sitting here having this conversation right now, and this is empirical evidence, right? But it's possible that it's a dream.
Yeah.
I've had those dreams. I've had dreams where I was telling someone just like you, listen, if I'm sure of anything, we're sitting here having this conversation, and then I woke up.
Right. They're called nightmares.
And I remember the person had a very bemused look on his face before I woke up.
I want to have your dreams. My dreams are about some of the callers to the show on occasion, and
but it's that. But belief, faith. That's one. I want to jump on something else. I'm trying to think of things that'll upset some audience members. So when you quoted Hume, and there was a really interesting point you said some ridiculous things, and that is one of my problems with quoting philosophers, okay? Philosophers say reasonable things, as do physicists, and stupid things. And what I find is this problem of claiming, just because someone says something very reasonable, that they're become an authority is a real problem for me. Because, he was writing at a time we knew very little about physics or consciousness. And so there are no scientific authorities. And I really always, it's great to quote people, great literature, great philosophers, but not then to say, some people like Aristotle. I've never been as big a fan of Aristotle as some people. But he said some good things, but he also said women and men have a different number of teeth. He could have discovered it by opening a mouth. Okay? And so, I'm always wary about this authority that when I have that discussion with some philosophers, they say, oh, but so-and-so said.
See, that drives me crazy. So for reference, whenever I quote a philosopher, it's not as a citation of authority. It's a recognition that they expressed long ago and far better than me the thing that I'm trying to explain.
This isn't casting aspersions on you, but almost everything you say has been expressed long ago far better than you by
Yes.
No, I mean, we all have to realize that. I mean, it's amazing the more I study both history and science, it's amazing to see how many of the things we talk about are anticipated by interesting people early on.
Yeah. So what would be your last belief, conviction, intuition to go? What's the premise which, if it came into conflict with data, you would be most tempted to say, well, there must be something wrong with the data?
I guess in my own existence, because I have a personal reason to want to exist, probably. I mean, it's probably rational.
I translate that as just that consciousness is here and something seems to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I'd have to say, and I was going to use the word believe, except I just made a point of saying we shouldn't. That my whole being is based on the fact that there's an objective reality. I mean, everything I do in my life and my work is based on that. And so the assumption that there is no objective reality is something that I would have I guess would be the hardest thing for me to give up. I like to think for rational reasons, but I also think it's probably passion as well. What about you?
Well, it's close to that. I mean, it is actually the two premises that have just come up. One is that consciousness exists, whatever it is. It's just, again, we could be living in a simulation. If the simulation,
there's a lot of good reasons to think we're not, by the way.
Yes, no, I would grant you that, but even that wouldn't violate what I'm calling consciousness. Consciousness, clearly, the fact that something seems to be happening, whether this is a dream, whether it's a simulation, whether it's
But if we were in a simulation, there'd still be consciousness.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So consciousness is the one thing that can't be an illusion, though everything else could be an illusion.
Well, I guess I'd have to ask, what do you mean by illusion? I mean, if something
not actually there when you think it's there in this.
Well, but if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, if the world is set up so that everything that happens based on the assumption that it's there happens, then that's indistinguishable from constantly being fooled, right?
Well, I'm just saying the one thing you can't be fooled about is, I mean, you put it in terms of your own existence. Mm-hmm. I think there are things about your existence that you could be fooled about. For instance, you could think you have a body where you really don't, or you could think the body has a certain character where it really doesn't. You could think you have free will where you really don't. I mean, there are many people in that situation, and we've talked about that. You could think you have a self. I mean, many people, I have spent some time talking about this. Many people are walking around with a feeling of self that I think is an illusion. But consciousness is the context in which all veridical and non-veridical perceptions can arise. And so consciousness for me.
If I could be the douchey philosopher quoting dude for a moment. In a way, Sam is echoing Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Basically, the whole point is that...
Except for the I part.
And yeah, well, see, and I would say that the very idea of an active consciousness is contingent upon an I, upon a self. Now, there we may disagree, like we're about to disagree on free will in a moment. Spoiler alert. But the thing that you will hate, and I will agree with you, despite being a philosophy geek, is, I think it was Hobbes who pointed out to Descartes that his cogito was based on an assumption that reason was reasonable. Now, my friend Aaron Ra has been complaining lately that every time he gets into a debate with a theist of some stripe, that as he keeps pushing them back further and further, not only do they begin their appeals to faith, which is no justification for anything, but they then begin to question reality at all. Like, how do you know that reason is reasonable? You have no foundation for it.
Well, that's a genuine problem.
That's why I do physics, because, you know, you can argue about that forever, but we can figure out how the world works. I mean,
You think you're doing physics, but no.
But much of what you do in physics, at least in quantum mechanics, is remain agnostic about what's really going on. I mean, so it's, for instance, differentiating the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics from some other variant. You can be non-committal there, and they have very different pictures of reality.
Yeah,
So
we
you can
talked
just
a
say
little bit
the math
on your
works and the
podcast,
experiments
but
work. Yeah.
yes and no. The problem with the many worlds interpretation and other interpretations of quantum mechanics is they're interpretations, and it's a real problem for me that people. So the real world is quantum mechanical, at least as far as we can tell, and all classical interpretations are just approximations of that quantum mechanical world. So they're all going to be wrong. The late physicist Sidney Coleman, who was the smartest guy when I was at Harvard and is now deceased, but wonderful. So we should really be talking about the interpretations of classical mechanics, because it's the world we live in is this approximation to reality. So we should be talking about how to interpret that in terms of the underlying reality, instead of talking about how to interpret the underlying reality in terms of something that's just clearly wrong.
But
there's one physicist in the audience.
One person who understood what you were saying.
I have a former student who's out there somewhere, so you better be clapping. Okay.
But these pictures are genuinely incommensurable. So if you're going to take many worlds and say, this is the picture of reality as we think it to be, that there's a functionally infinite number of parallel universes where you and I are having decreasingly similar conversations to the one we're having right now. Beings just like us, thinking the same thoughts, but with one atom tweaked. Mm-hmm. That's a very different picture than David Bohm's interpretation or the Copenhagen interpretation.
Yeah, but as I say, they're all just interpretations.
But that's what, when we feel we understand something in science or in any other area of cognition, we have an interpretation that we think is mapping on to reality. So it's like, just walk it back a little bit and say, take molecular biology. We think we know what's going on inside a cell, and which means we think that if we could, and some of these experiments have almost been done, that we could virtually get a video camera into a cell and look at genes transcribing, right? And so we see the machinery that is classical, and it's
that is because you're on cell sizes still. But smaller sizes, it isn't. But,
my point is that's where it's
we have this
violating
interpretation
our
that guides us. There's no doubt that scientists have an interpretation that guides them, but the whole point is to constantly be checking that to see if that interpretation is wrong or if the consequence of that interpretation. So you constantly have to second guess yourself, and that's really important, because when you get to new things, is usually is when you're just surprised, and something you assume to be natural or normal turns out not to be.
Yeah.
And that's when really great scientific discoveries are made, is when that interpretation gets set aside or confronts reality, a reality that you never knew existed.
But that's another way of echoing Matt's concern, or your friend's concern, which is reason. What we call reason is an evolved property which may not be a sharp enough tool to get at every corner of reality that we want to understand. We have commonsensical notions of, like the law of non-contradiction, right? Something can't both be and not be an X, right?
Well, yeah, but except in physics, it's all the time. Yeah,
exactly.
So that's the point.
No, it doesn't.
Right. Our reason, as Richard Dawkins has said many times we've been together, was we evolved on the savannas in Africa to escape lions and not to understand quantum mechanics. Yeah. And it's a fortunate, for some of us, a fortunate aside that a consequence of that somehow that we have developed mathematics and physics. So reason, I never understand when people say, and I had this debate with, William Lane Craig among others, but somehow classical reason and logic should guide our notions. And the point is that it's classical reason and logic, when it comes to the world, are often wrong because our notions of classical reason and logic are based on our experience.
No.
And no? Okay, tell me why.
So I hear this a lot, and here's the best short, quick explanation that I can come up with. When we talk about identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, don't think of those as if they are defining what something is. They represent a descriptor of a single circled Venn diagram. Everything's either in the circle or outside the circle, but it doesn't tell you what the circle is.
But it's not true. Electrons are in the circle and outside the circle.
No, because now you're defining in the circle as this is where the electron is. It's a fail. So if the circle represented apples, everything is either an apple or it's not an apple. It can't both be an apple and not an apple at the same time and in the same way, which is the extension of that. When we talk about electrons being in two places at once, and et cetera, or something's quantum in multiple states, all that means is that the definition of that is now everything is either quantum or not quantum. Because the laws of logic don't tell you anything about what something is. They are just the framework that allows us to begin to categorize things. So you're not violating it by coming up with a definition that is contrary to our intuitions. Hey, something can't be here and here at the same time. That's our intuition. That is not a problem.
You're telling me that logic has to be redefined. Okay, let you get your applause.
There's the three philosophers.
Yeah. But if you tell me that your logic has to be redefined based on what we discover about reality, fine. We redefine what we mean by logic and reason as we learn more about the universe. But that's
take a very simple case. I mean, this is an intuition. It's not quite a logical intuition, but we have a very strong intuition that there is a now, and simultaneity is a real thing. So,
but it isn't.
So that's
I agree.
I'm feeding you your line as a physicist.
Okay.
Yeah. You just came in too early.
Thank you. So, I left my wallet
in this universe. So my two fingers snap at the same time here. That must be good enough for the universe. That is the now, and yet you can tell us how velocity.
Well, simultaneity only applies to here, not there. That's the point. If we're all in the same place, if I'm sitting on your lap, and I won't, and we snap our fingers and we're in the same place, then we have a now. But we just have to realize that my now is not your now, just like it's not your now. Not least because the sound system takes time for you to hear us. But if I'm looking at you, the light takes time. And so I can never be in two places at once as a classical being. And therefore, anything that happens there is never in my now. It's always then. I can never experience now in more than one place. And that's what Einstein realized to make him realize that when we assume that there's a universal now, we're wrong. And moreover, there are conditions in the universe when some people are traveling very fast, where in fact it's quite clear that my now is not your now.
So the sequence can be reversed.
Yeah, the sequence can be reversed. It's a kind of catch-22. Future and past can be reversed, but only by an amount such that cause and effect can never be screwed up. If something is the cause of something for one person, it's the cause of that thing for every people. It's an amazing catch-22 of the universe.
God was merciful there. Yeah.
Merciful, and yes, exactly.
And it won't surprise you, but I'm in complete agreement. I think this idea, we have intuitions about the world. Like even when we're trying to do science and you say T0, as if you could come up with a discrete marker in time. And not only do you not experience that, but there's no reason to think that you could do that. You know, when you tend to things like Zeno's paradox of let me divide this down, I can divide it. What's the smallest unit? There are no units of time that are the construct of time. We apply seconds, minutes.
What is the standard, if there is a standard view in physics? Take much of what we say about time and the notion of a block universe. What is physical thinking?
Well, you know, it's a long discussion. I think people get hung up on time a little too much because, I mean, you don't have this problem with space, and time and space are tied together in physics completely, in special relativity and general relativity. Time is much more difficult to picture than space, and there are interesting questions about time that we don't have the answer to, such as you can go in a circle in space, but can you go in a circle in time? And if that's the case, you know, then it addresses issues of causality and all of that. Many of us think there are probably physical arguments why in sensible universes you can't do a circle in time. But I don't see it as, I know there's been books written about time, but for a physicist, it's space and time are this playing field on which events happen. And that's it.
Do events really happen? Is there really such a thing as a sequence of events, or is there just a totality that's sort of viewed from outside of time?
It's an interesting question, and it has to do with things we don't understand. Whether if quantum mechanics is applied to general relativity, then in some sense time, as you see it, is a consequence of your specific existence within a certain quantum wave function. But in the meta quantum gravity world, time is an illusion. And that sounds neat, but we don't really have a theory of quantum gravity, so I think we have to leave that question open, just like we don't yet know. When I said you don't have problems with space, you don't. But we don't understand space either, because at some fundamental level, space, gravity, quantum general relativity is a theory of space and time. And if quantum mechanics applies to general relativity, then our notions of space as well as time have to change. And we don't have, and some people think they have an inkling of an answer with string theory, and they're probably wrong. But not to cast aspersions on string theory, although I do, but just simply what people have to realize is that most ideas are wrong. Most really good ideas are wrong in science. And so it would be very surprising if this very bold idea, which is very well motivated, don't get me wrong, actually we're right. And so far there's no, in my opinion, there's no empirical evidence that it is right in any way that relates to the world we live in. But so therefore, I don't understand time as much as I don't understand space at some fundamental microscopic level. And I'm fine not understanding it. It's why I go to work every day.
I desperately need to, yes.
Oh, I didn't do it for applause.
So I'm happy that we're doing 3 more of these, because we're not going to get to the one topic that I wanted to get to tonight, because I'm told that it's time to line up for questions. So
Great.
if we can start bringing the house lights up.
Did you?
And you can.
Great. You didn't get to. You know why you didn't get? You know why you didn't get to free will? Because you had no choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
No
free will.
Name that topic so that if someone is
Sure.
curious about that topic.
There was going to be a
We'll
discussion
ask,
about
I'm
free
sure.
will, because I am
There's an
a
audience out there.
compatibilist. Yeah, there's people out there. I'm a compatibilist a la Dennett, and they are not. And, I figured 2 versus 1, it should be fun. And I'm sure it'll come up at different times, and we're going to talk about it a bunch over the course of this. But
someone may yet ask about it.
I could listen to both of you for ages, which is why I'm very happy that we're going to continue doing these events. But we want to make sure that you get the questions so that it's not all about me asking questions. I appreciate the person who said keep talking, though, because that's my favorite thing. So we'll alternate, and if you could just say your name and a couple notes. Questions. End in a question mark. Do not begin with your life story or dissertation. Please remember that there are many people waiting to ask questions. I have a call-in show. With a hold button and a hang-up button. And if you think I won't hang up on your ass live on stage, you are much mistaken. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Carter, and I want to thank all of you for thinking out loud in public, which is the way that Sam's described it.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Sam was thinking, I was just talking. Okay. That's right.
It all sounded good to me.
Okay.
So I am going to jump into the free will discussion. I've heard you say, Sam, many times you have obviously no control over the circumstances in which you're born. You have no control over your genetic code. We live in a deterministic world. I'm just curious from a practical perspective, and it sounds like we have at least one compatibilist on stage. Can you take pride of ownership or authorship over anything, and do you?
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think pride is worth outgrowing, certainly. I think there's an asymmetry between pride and shame and regret, other social emotions there, which seem predicated on the same illusion, but not so much. I think you can, and again, how you think as an adult is not exactly the same as what I think you should encourage your children to think. It's not a matter of lying to children. It's just there's certain things that we as adults understand about the world that we don't insist that little kids understand, and for good reason, because it would be terrifying or destabilizing or not allow them to get the cognitive and emotional tools we want them to get. So but I think pride is, I don't feel pride about anything really. When I look at how things happen, it's just I have whatever advantages I have whatever opportunities I have there's such a massive role of luck, whatever luck actually is, just to have been born in a society that basically works, surrounded by people who are not killing one another, always, right? I mean, it's just you can't take responsibility. You didn't build the roads, right? I mean, all these self-made people who are walking around saying I did it myself. There were a million things that allowed them to do whatever they did. And again, you didn't pick your parents, you didn't sculpt your genes, so you can't take credit for anything. And that doesn't mean that effort doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that there isn't a proximate cause of intention and desire in each moment to getting things done. But you can't really take credit for it in each moment if you're paying attention to how it's happening. Yeah.
Is it okay if I add something? Because all the questions will be for Sam anyway. I'll add something. I know that Sam and I generally agree about free will because we're right and you're wrong. But
We'll see.
but the whole point is that, in my version, is that the world is essentially, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from a world in which there's free will. So I think we by practical necessity take responsibility for actions, even if we realize, as we do, that there are a host of factors beyond our control that determine those actions. But we as a society and as individuals need to function because the world appears to be a world in which, as I say, for all intents and purposes, is indistinguishable from a world with free will.
But
we need to take
say,
responsibility for actions. That means I'm not talking about punishment, or necessarily pride, but we might as well, if we don't take responsibility for our actions, we're just ultimately divorcing ourselves from the world as it practically appears.
This is a genuine point of confusion, I think, for people. Nothing I've said suggests that you can't take responsibility for actions or that I can't hold you responsible. But when you actually look at what you mean when you say you're going to hold someone responsible for their actions, it's for those actions where holding them responsible has an effect on their behavior.
And other people, and social.
Exactly, yeah.
We incarcerate some people if we were doing it right, not because to punish them, but because with a social contract, we're trying to make sure society functions, and ideally trying to help them function better within society.
It doesn't matter whether it's a robot that's gone bad or somebody with free will. This is the agent that took the action, and something needs to be done to prevent it from going on. I'm in agreement with both of you on what. So this is the thing. The nonprofits did a 3.5-hour podcast one time with 4 of us arguing about free will, and in the end, we all agreed on exactly what we do and don't have. We just disagreed on what to call it. For me, what most people care about with free will is not whether I could have done something differently, not whether my actions were predetermined by the physical laws of the universe. It is I, as a thinking agent, have desires. And am I being impeded from fulfilling those desires? And I don't mean in a simple sense like I desire to fly and the laws of the universe won't let me flap my wings and do it. I mean, Sam could get up and walk off and jump off this stage, or I could drag Sam and throw him off the stage. At the end, both situations, he's down there. The difference between him as an agent alone taking that action of his own volition and me as an agent imposing my volition over his, the difference between those two actions, I think, summarizes everything people care about free will.
Not everything, though.
All right, the bulk of what people care about.
Not even the bulk. It's people legitimately.
I think I agree with Sam on this one.
Okay, what do they care about that free will that is not encapsulated?
It's that I could have done otherwise. I could have done that better. I just screwed up. I could have done. I could have not screwed up. And the idea that you could, if you rewound the movie of your life, you could sink the putt.
So I think
say
that people,
the thing that you forgot to say. Everything that gives motivation to the feeling of regret.
Yeah.
But this has to do with the way people's brains have been poisoned about how to think about free will. And I'm not just being facetious there. This is.
But you're talking
when
about
I say,
how most people think about free will, and I'm saying.
Okay, but I think that there's a subtler thing to this. When I say I could have done differently, I don't mean if I rewound the universe, I would have done differently. That seems to me to be an exercise in training oneself in how to act in future situations that are similar.
Yes.
Okay?
I agree with you.
When you say that people care about they could have done otherwise, I'm not convinced that that's the case, because when people talk about free will, they're talking about morality, they're talking about holding agents' action. They're talking about it not quite in the sense of freedom of expression, freedom of my volition, but it's far closer to that, I think. But even if you're right, even if what most people want free will to be is that I could have done otherwise, that has no bearing on whether there is some variety of free will, independent of what people want, or some labeling, categorizing that we value as free will, which, not to quote a philosopher, but Dennett, the subtitle to one of his books was The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. And I'm always cautious to make sure we all agree there's no such thing as libertarian free will. The idea that I could have done differently or rewind any of this. I think that because people have been trained to think a specific way about free will, and only this counts as free will, that we're overlooking a variety of free will.
I
Which
just think
does
calling it
happen.
a free will is misleading. I mean, you can
Yeah.
call it whatever you want, but
Well, that's the thing. 3.5 hours, and we all agreed on what we had, but not what to call it.
well, no, but I think there are genuine differences that Dan and I mean, Dan and I have not been able to resolve our differences on this point for some reason, and so it's not that we totally agree and we're just using this one word differently. We have different intuitions about this. I think I can speak fairly for Dan here. He thinks the idea that free will is on any level an illusion is a dangerous thing to believe. And we spread that meme at our peril.
And by the way, I don't think that.
Yeah, and I actually think that's, I guess, potentially dangerous for somebody, but I think it's a net positive for most people to see.
I am not the slightest bit concerned about the potential danger of people thinking or not thinking that they have free
No,
will.
some people find it genuinely destabilizing. I mean, no, I forgot to do it here, but normally when I talk about the illusion of free will, I issue a little, fine print disclaimer at the beginning saying, if what I'm about to say makes you feel weird, go to the bar and we'll hang out later.
A lot of people feel incredibly disappointed when they come to believe that there's no longer believe that there's a God.
But I think that's the great, again, coming back to science, I've said it before to kids, the great thing, and education, forget science, the great thing about education and thinking and experiencing is that ideas that you hold incredibly dear that are central to your being are proved wrong. That's what makes life worth living, and that's the value of science, is that we should all be willing to find those things around.
And for the record, before we go on to the other question, I'm sure we'll talk more about it. I know that Dan, I read your book, Free Will, and the only fault that I had with the entire book was when you discussed compatibilism, because I think you said something along the lines of.
But have you read the subsequent back and forth between
I did.
me and Dan?
Yeah.
But granted, I gave it short shrift in the book, but Dan and I have had a lot of opportunity to converge here, and we haven't yet done it, both publicly and privately. And
Yeah,
so it's
and I'm not him. I'm just saying that in the book, what you said about compatibilism was, I think, and correct me, something along the lines of compatibilists are like redefining free will to suit themselves. Something along those lines.
well, I said, I think the thing that most annoyed Dan was I said, compatibilism is every puppet is free as long as it learns to love its strings. Yeah, something like that. And Dan, I have
But
yet to
wouldn't
hear
a
the end.
puppet that loved its strings therefore be conscious? And no, I'm just that was the only thing I had in the book, because I agree with you that compatibilists are redefining classical definitions, or they are coming up with a definition for free will that I think matches what is real. Not that I could have done otherwise.
Well, that's fine. My only issue with Dan is that it's not acknowledging how seditious that is with respect to what most people are walking around believing. It really is it is not the free will. The free will worth wanting is not the free will that most people think they have.
Which is independent from whether or not we have the free will worth wanting.
Well, no, but again, I'm just saying to call it free will is misleading there. Because, I mean, Dan will say we're all moist robots, right? That's a surprise to most people. But, I mean, there's a genuine, at least there's one genuine paradox here for me with respect to free will. And when Dan and I wrote back and forth about this, I described it in terms of Tiger Woods missing a putt, right? And here's the genuine, and I don't even know what I think about this yet. It seems to me to be a kind of moral paradox. When you take the person who should be most competent to do something, again, to use the putt analogy because it's so simple, I'm a bad golfer. If I miss a 3-foot putt, it's no big surprise. You're not going to hold me so responsible for missing it because I'm just the kind of golfer who's going to miss it some considerable percentage of time. But with someone like Tiger Woods or whoever's the best golfer these days, if anyone should make it, that person should make it. And so when he misses it or she misses it, it says the least about the person. In fact, they're the least responsible. It's the most anomalous circumstance. When Tiger Woods misses a 3-foot putt, that's just some error in the system. It's like so you're a physicist. Mm-hmm. If I ask you, what's the second law of thermodynamics, and right now you can't tell me, right? You don't know. You've completely forgotten. That is a total anomaly. That's not you being most responsible. If anyone should know, you should know. But if you don't know right now, we're going to think you had a stroke or something bad happened.
Yeah, I don't know whether I like that analogy
by the way.
at all because no, not just because
It's the food.
Again, I think of it as I don't see all these paradoxes. When every time Tiger Woods makes a putt, there's a probability it's going to go in. There's a probability it's not going. It's much more likely for Tiger Woods than you, but it's not 100%.
Okay, but to say that he should have made it.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so you're a trained physicist, right?
I hope so.
And I ask you what to explain the second law of thermodynamics. And right now, if you have no idea, right, and then you come off stage and 15 minutes later you say, oh God, I remember what it is. I should have been able to answer the question. It's understandable that you would be kicking yourself, but in your case, someone who knows this as much as he knows that he has hands, it's the most anomalous failure. It's very strange to hold you responsible for it. It would be completely mysterious in your case. And so when you map that onto morality, you have someone who's impeccably moral, right? Who would not hurt a fly. He or she always tells the truth. But then this person wakes up tomorrow morning and starts, beheading children. That is the least in character. This is the person who we would hold most responsible because he's the most capable of being responsible in this.
This is in line with like Charles Whitman and the tumor.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, but he's not right. I mean, if that had been St. Francis with a tumor, yeah.
But I guess I'm.
It strikes me as a paradox. Like, where is responsibility if you can't find it?
I'm a physicist, so sophisticated things go beyond me. But the whole people. I guess the whole point, which is that people are human, right? And therefore, you can't expect
doubt about free will or the doubt about the claim that responsibility runs very, very deep in each moment.
Yeah, and everyone is going to, because of the fact that we're human and we're not free to have chosen anything else, we are going to do unexpected things that we may feel we have no control over, or we may feel we do have control over. That feeling is an illusion, but we are going to do unexpected things. So I accept that, and big deal.
But it is a big deal because you can really have a lot of compassion for flawed humanity.
Yeah, no, that's where I was just going to get to earlier. While it may make people feel uncomfortable, as I'm sure people are feeling right now by wasting so much time talking about free will, but the good part about it is, the really good part of that discomfort is the fact that we begin to have compassion and we begin to think less in societal terms about punishment and more about living in harmony in some ways. And so I think that's a really important aspect of this, is to realize that there are factors that lead people to do things. And it doesn't mean they're not responsible if they kill someone, but it means that the whole notion of punishment, in my mind, goes out the window.
Unless there are cases where punishment really works and it's the only thing that works and it's necessary that it work for that thing.
Well, empirically, if you call it punishment, yeah. I mean,
But the idea that people really deserve, in a retributional sense, that what they get, that's suspect.
I think operationally, yeah. I mean, I don't know whether retribution is that, but let's say primitive societies have ostracism, which works very well as a way of. But anyway, I would rather.
No, I want to go on. I want to say one thing, if you'll allow me, to be a little difficult to stick a pin in something. When you say compatibilists are not talking about free will in the same way that other people are, I think the same argument can be made towards us, that we're not talking about morality. Or the compatibilists are talking about free will not in the way that other people are. That we're not talking about morality the same way other people are, because I think the bulk of history, people have wanted there to be an absolute answer, an absolute right answer. And when we both acknowledge that there are perhaps multiple right answers, this departs from what people think of morality. And I think compatibilists may be doing something similar with free will, and the fact that they've departed doesn't mean that there's not something that we could valuably and usefully call free will.
Well, I think this all comes down to the same point, which will allow us to hopefully segue out. And Sam alluded to earlier that our notions, and what again, there are words. We use words, but words are imprecise. And T.S. Eliot said that one. And words are imprecise, and science changes the meaning of words because, and by science I mean empirical evidence, learning about the world. I have non-stop discussions with people about nothing, okay, since I wrote that book. And people are upset by the fact that science has changed the definition of nothing. They say, you're not allowed to change the definition. And I say, I call that learning. And so I think all these notions of free will and morality will evolve as we learn more about cognition and the way humans work. And that'll be fine. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I couldn't agree more violently. Thank you.
All right, that's a good segue.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your patience.
My name's Greg. Christopher Hitchens once said to Sean Hannity, "You sound an awful lot to me like someone who's never heard the argument against your own position." And with today's social media echo chambers, it feels like that's becoming more and more of a problem.
Sure.
What do we do to combat this? How do we get people to be interested in finding out if they're full of crap?
Well, let me jump in, and I think the problem is really basic. I mean, the internet is part of the problem because you can choose. We all thought it'd be great because it gives you open access to information. There were only 3 channels when I grew up, and you did get your news from David Brinkley or Walter Cronkite or what. And wouldn't it be great to be able to not have that news filter? But in fact, without a filter, then you have access to everything. And unless you have an innate filter, then you're often going to choose people who agree with what you haven't said in the beginning. And so this is maybe going to sound trite, but I really do believe it's the case. It has to do with a deep problem in my mind about how we teach in schools. We teach, okay, just wait, you may not agree with me, so just wait. When I was growing up, and still teach things as if teaching is teaching a bunch of facts. And we have to give people a certain number of facts and they can become adults. But that's not what teaching should be about. It should be, science is not a bunch of facts, it's a process for deriving facts. And what we need to do in the current world is not teach the facts, but the process. Because I didn't bring my phone out here because I knew I'd be reading it while we were talking. But there's more information in my iPhone than and more misinformation than I could ever get from school. So that's irrelevant. What we need is to teach people how to distinguish fact from fiction. I call that science, but it's a process of empirical discovery, questioning, skepticism. And so I think we should be teaching with questioning, not with a bunch of facts, making it a process of discovery and teaching people that process. And then that becomes lifelong learning that they can apply to the crap that appears on the internet. So anyway.
I guess I would just add one brief piece there, which is I think we need to reestablish the norm or create a new one that allows for serious conversation about anything, and with enough charity among people who fundamentally disagree, that you're not demonizing the people you're talking to about these hard issues. I mean, what's happening on the left with all of these taboos around conversation and the deplatforming of everybody who's on the right on college campuses, that's just so dysfunctional. We have to cure ourselves of this, and the right returns the favor as well in demonizing people on the left. It's just the idea that if you don't say precisely the right thing immediately so as to conform to some local taboo, you now need to be shunned or have your reputation destroyed. It's just silencing sensible conversation on everything we should be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Solomon Lederer, and I have another question about free will, so feel free to keep a really truncated answer. There we go.
Go ahead, get the question.
So can't you say that free will exists in the same way that pain or any property of consciousness exists, so that when you feel, for instance, a pinprick, where does that pain occur? You can say there's synapses firing, it's there's something happening in the limbic system, but ultimately it's just cells and atoms, cells and atoms all the way down. So but nevertheless we know that we're feeling a pain, but where is that?
Yeah, no, it's totally different. For me, it's totally different, because if we found out that the universe was just a single block, that there was no such thing as an event or a cause, there was just everything's already happened, the future exists as much as the past, Let's say that's the right answer, right?
And in some pictures it is. But
Yes. Well, let's say that's just true. So process is an illusion. So the future's already written. You're like a novel where you're you think you're living on page 60, but page 120 is already written. My experience, my moment-to-moment experience is totally compatible with that being true, right? I feel that that's possible. In fact, there's nothing in my experience that disconfirms that. Whereas pain is something that I experience. If you told me, well, pain doesn't exist, I would say, well, no, I can find it right now. It's an enormous difference. It could not be more different.
I believe that.
And I'm in agreement. Yes, sir. By the way, I've been told that we have about 5 minutes left for questions.
We will stretch that 5 minutes.
Go ahead.
Wow, really?
Hi, my name is Joey. Thank you all for your time.
Yes, thanks for
Sam,
coming.
I just wanted you to expand on the illusion of the self.
Well, it's the flip side of this very thing with free will. The feeling of having that you have free will that you could have done otherwise, for me, is the obverse of the feeling that you're a subject riding around inside your head. So in addition to thoughts arising in consciousness and intentions arising and perceptions arising and language and imagery and everything that arises, the contents of consciousness, in addition to all of that, there's a center that is the subject, that is the I, that is the thinker, that is the seer. There's not just seeing, there's a seer of the thing seen. That feeling of being, as I've said somewhere, the rider on the horse of consciousness, that is what it feels like to feel like you're the author of your thoughts and intentions and choices. And I think you can get rid of that. I mean, I know what it's like to get rid of that. You can lose that feeling, if only for moments at a time. And when you lose that feeling, everything else remains. If you still see and hear and smell and taste and even think, there's a more expansive feeling of just consciousness and its contents.
Yeah, I don't want to get a long debate. I think I do disagree with that. But Philip K. Dick said, reality is that which continues to exist even when you stop believing in it. Here's my way of saying that there really is a self, I think. I shoot you.
Well, find it. No,
Okay,
there's really a body.
I shoot your body.
Yes,
I shoot
you'll
your
have
body, and your self stops to exist, seeking to exist.
That's not what I mean by self.
Well,
This is the confusing thing because
I'm
so
not
I think
saying,
you and I
I'm
are
not
largely
saying
in
people
agreement.
don't exist. So there are people.
there is a center of your conscious being. It happens to whether it exists in
Where
some.
is
Well,
it?
it's in.
I tend to
I'll
view
give
them
you a
as
hint.
co-equal.
It's in your body. It's not out of your body.
Well, no, but you
So
can
it's somewhere in your body.
No, actually, you can actually have this experience.
Out of body
It's
experiences.
illusory,
Don't
but you
give me
can-
that.
No, but you can. You can precipitate it in the lab.
What?
You can precipitate it in the lab, and we know how to give people an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, the solution.
It's not that you're really out of your body, but what you're calling your body. I mean, it's just as a matter of sheer neurology. This is in your brain right now. You're
Yeah.
not, like so. It's all in your. The world is in your
So
brain.
I'm
The
willing
world
to
you
argue
experience
that
is in
yourself is in your brain, but it's not an illusion. I don't think.
I have not had the experience that Sam has had. So it makes no sense to me, this idea, because for me, consciousness and the self are essentially equivalent, that the mind is something the brain does. Curious quick note, if I took out your brain and put it in Lawrence's body, and I took his brain and put it in your body, would you now be Lawrence? Would this body now
No, I
contain Lawrence?
think you would go with the brain. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
brain is the
argue.
hard drive.
I would argue, and so that somewhere in your brain is what I think effectively, and I tend to
Yeah.
work in terms of operational definitions as a physicist. Effectively, yourself is your brain.
Well, I can explain this. I can make sense of it logically. Again, I mean, but you're arguing on the basis. The punchline of your argument is that I haven't had the experience I'm telling you I've had. Right? You're saying.
No, I'm sure you've had lots of illusionary experiences.
Well, no, but I can have it right now. I mean,
What?
So the experience is the reason why this experience is more credible than the experience of feeling like a self is because there's a few things to say here. One is, in the average case, there's a tremendous amount of training required to just even be able to pay attention to experience enough to notice this thing that I'm claiming is true of consciousness. Right? So you have to, like, if I would put you in a room for 10 days and give you an exercise for, just pay attention to your breath for the first 3 days. And every time your mind wanders, just come back to the breath. This is meditation or
I
mindfulness.
know you did that for 2 minutes to me. It drives me nuts.
Okay, yeah.
But
If you became interested in what was driving you nuts, you would notice that it's just this automaticity of thinking, right? You're talking to yourself without noticing that you're talking to yourself. And that talking to yourself has consequences. You're filtering
I realize that.
everything through this
So
conversation.
there's what is called there's something that people something training that they what's the word that people
It could be
in the moment
meditation or mindfulness.
mindfulness
Yeah, exactly,
mindfulness
right.
and
Okay. So this is a genuine skill that you actually don't know anything about, right?
no I think
problem
I think
here-
I probably do experience your mindfulness sometimes when I'm working on a mathematical problem,
But that's a great analogy. So like I know much less mathematics than you do, right? So you would be perfectly capable of finding a page of equations where I would look at it and my honest experience would be, well, this is gibberish, right? Like I can't make heads or tails of this, right? Now, what if I were to say to you, not only does this seem like gibberish to me, I think it actually seems like gibberish to you. And you're just confused about it.
No. I'm not discounting. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying you have a different experience of it, and I've been in, I've been in isolation tanks where you begin to hallucinate too, and that's a real experience. As Oliver Sacks said, hallucinations are real to those people that have them. They're just as real as reality, and so I guess
but they're
what worries me about what you
transitory.
say in this regard is that I hear exactly the same thing when people tell me, God is real because I've experienced God. I've experienced God in my inner sense, and I guess I'm just skeptical of that as well as I'm skeptical.
I think at this point,
But you should
page
run
of
the
equations-
experiment. You should run the experiment on yourself because the first thing you would discover is that it's the thing that you're being asked to do, to pay attention. It should make sense to you that in order to find the data, you should be able to direct your attention where the data are, right? If you can't do that, like if I say, we're going to run an experiment here and we need to look at what's in this glass, and you can't even find the glass, that's a problem. You have to find the data. And if you became interested in why that was so difficult, that already would be a revelation. I mean, most people are walking around unaware that there's any alternative to being lost in thought every moment of the day. And they're not even aware they're lost in thought. It's just, and the moment they become aware, they think, well, this is just me. I looked inside for a minute and a half, found nothing of interest, and there must be no there. It is a domain of expertise, and I don't consider myself
I'm willing to accept that
at the height
I
of
know
that
for
domain
sure
by
that
any
you have
stretch.
expertise in these areas and these experiences that I might have, and that's and in many senses I admire and that capability, which I may or may not have. I do, but I guess I just don't think it defines a different reality. It defines a different talent and a different self-perception.
Yeah,
and a
no,
different-
it's not a different reality. It's just it's a very subtle difference in perception of this reality, which makes a very big difference in the kinds of claims you want to make about the nature of the mind. It also just happens to be incredibly useful because so much of our suffering is born of our identification with thought, because so much the character of our thought is so often unhappy. We're worried about the future. We're regretting the past. We're living with this conversation with ourselves, and it's very often an unhappy one. And to be able to break that spell, even for a few moments at a time, can make a world of difference in terms of
Yeah, I mean,
well-being.
it comes back to something we're talking about otherwise, but it's this notion of offense. In my opinion, if we're offended, big deal. As Christopher said, and also another friend of mine, Stephen Fry, it's just being offended doesn't give you any rights to anything. It just means you're offended. But how you choose to respond to that, whether you choose to be hurt or traumatized, or whether you choose to have a discussion, or whether you choose to slough it off, is your decision. And so you're the author of how your internal questioning deals with those external.
Sounds a lot like a variety of free
on
will.
one level.
If you're free.
I threw that in as a joke.
I was going to say you're
because-
free to choose how you respond, but I knew I better not say that.
No, I threw that in as a joke partly because they've just told me that
That was 5 minutes.
time is up,
That was the 10-minute version of 5 minutes.
which is why I'm so glad that we're doing this a couple more times and we can continue this
I'm
discussion.
really sorry.
I'm supposed to tell everybody who's standing in line that, gosh, we love you, and if we weren't so talkative, we would have got to your questions. But the book signing is going to take place out there. You guys should have the instructions. Please join me in thanking all of you for coming this evening. And thank you to Sam Harris, Lawrence Strauss for a great evening.
Thank you. All right. Well played, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you're enjoying the Waking Up podcast, there are many ways you can support it at samharris.org/support. As a supporter of the podcast, you'll get early access to tickets to my live events, and you'll get exclusive access to my Ask Me Anything episodes, as well as to the AMA page on my website, where you can pose questions and vote on the questions of others. And please know that your support is greatly appreciated. It's listeners like you that make this show possible.